Welcome back to the Wolf Pack. It's Luke Negron, the young wolf of politics. Let's talk about vaccine hesitancy and misinformation. Ever since the left claimed a national election, they seem to be running wild with the idea that vaccines and COVID mitigation give them an all-expenses-paid pass to authoritarian rule. But have they been consistent with their narrative and claims all along the way? The short answer is absolutely not. Let's tackle two topics that have to do with hypocrisy and leftist misinformation. The first one has to do with the very idea that for you to even question the mainstream media and leftist narrative around COVID and specifically COVID vaccines means that you are a conspiracy theorist, a wild, unhinged rebel who should be silenced in the public square. But has that always been their narrative and their standard? Let's go to some examples of how that is the exact opposite of what they used to say when they were the ones trying to leverage the COVID situation to win an election. You see, while today vaccine hesitancy makes you an anti-science crazy person, just a few months ago, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the man who the left called a hero up until very recently, Andrew Cuomo, and other leftist leaders had serious doubts and misinformation that they would frequently and openly spread about the COVID vaccine program and about all of the parts that tied into it, including the FDA. These leaders blatantly questioned the vaccine's safety and legitimacy, the government's integrity, and the authentication through the FDA, which would eventually be reached for vaccine mass implementation. Don't believe me? I'm glad you said that. Check out the videos right here.
Skeptical American public about taking the vaccine, and they should be.
To say there's a vaccine that is approved and even distributed before the election. Would you get it?
Well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us.
Is the vaccine safe? Frankly, I'm not going to trust the federal government's opinion. And I wouldn't recommend to New Yorkers based on the federal government's opinion.
How confident are you in the approval process of the FDA right now?
How confident am I? I'm not that confident.
Vaccine comes. It's not likely to go through all the tests that need to be and the trials that are needed to be done. When we finally do, God willing, get a vaccine, who's going to take the shot? You could be the first one to say, put me, sign me up. They now say it's okay.
With these recent quotes in mind, we have to ask, what changed since they said these things just a few months back? Simple. They claimed victory in a national election. It's no longer beneficial for them to say things along the lines of what they would say during the campaign trail when they were trying to undercut every single thing that Trump and the conservative leadership provided for the country. Now leftists want to look good. They want to use the COVID era and COVID vaccines to power grab for their authoritarian delusions and fantasies. That's exactly what's happening. They've never cared about your safety, your freedom, your liberty, or your family's best interest. That's not what it's about to them, and they're proving it now. Before I move on to the second topic, if you want to financially support and partner with Red Liberty Media, you can sign up for our Patreon here. Now let's move on to point number 2. A few short months ago, you were insane if you even suggested that COVID numbers might be artificially inflated for various reasons and that COVID cases might be overcounted. Today, though, we have quite a different story brewing from multiple officials, including one you may recognize quite well. This one's a little bit personal for me because in recent history, I was one of the few on Twitter and other social media sharing facts and theories about how and why COVID was likely being overcounted by hospitals and sharing the logic behind how it is different to die with COVID versus dying of COVID. And here we are, just a little ways down the road, and just like with the Wuhan lab leak, the former conspiracy theory is now a widely accepted mainstream narrative. But you know that I always bring the receipts. So here are government officials, including leaders within the CDC, saying just that. Check it out.
Just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
Is it time to start rethinking how we're living with this virus, that it's potentially here to stay?
The overwhelming number of deaths, over 75%, occurred in people who had at least 4 comorbidities. So really, these are people who were unwell to begin.
Lastly, let's hear from the man himself, Dr. Fauci. Here we see Fauci explaining that there is a difference between children being admitted to hospitals with COVID versus being admitted because of COVID. And he further implies that the official COVID counts do not control for this difference. He even goes on to say very clearly that the numbers are overcounted. So with these points of hypocrisy and misinformation from the left in mind, have there been any public apologies from officials, from leaders, from the top down? No. How about from social media companies who harassed, fact-checked, and even banned people like me who made these exact same points a few months before the mainstream? No, absolutely not. Donald Trump was absolutely right when he said several years ago that the fake news media is the enemy of the American people. Those who spread lies and misinformation in order to further their own power-grabbing and authoritarian dreams are absolutely not on the same side of you, your family, your community's safety, or American liberty. And if you're holding your breath for apologies from elected officials who got it wrong, you might be waiting for a long time.